Let's welcome our speakers.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Wadim. I am a freelance product designer. He works for brands like Bio Group, Rabobank, and yeah, a bunch of others. It came from branding and love creating brands and creating their logos and everything. But then I rolled into user interface and user experience design, and eventually found that sweet spot between user interface design and branding, where working on design systems, and started to be called like the design system guru at my previous workspace. So yeah, that's a little bit in a nutshell who I am and what I'm doing currently. I live in the Netherlands, by the way.
Love it. And if you would like to connect with all the speakers, there are links to all the LinkedIn profiles. Michael, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Michael. I'm a design leader from the UK. I've led teams in all kind of different industries, B2B, B2C, done SaaS, done everything from like worked with Heineken, councils. So I've done a lot of public sector, but mainly health tech has been one of my biggest areas. And I've led teams through development of brand new systems, big systems, systems that have fed smaller systems for different kind of sub brands, as well as smaller design systems. I've done weird Frankenstein design systems, used skeletons of other systems like material and things like that. So yeah, I've got a lot of experience in that. A little bit like Wadim, I came from a branding background. I started out doing a lot of branded entities and a lot of print-based material. Even before then, I used to work as a head of forecasting. So I've also got a big financial budget background, which really helps when you're a designer, especially a design leader, because you can start tying it back to the bottom line. So that's me. I'm doing a lot of contract work at the moment, but looking to get back into another leadership position.
Love it. Great. Would you like to go next?
I'm working at Malwarebytes as a senior design system designer, but like Mark, like Wadim, my formation is from graphic designer, so comes back from there, and make all the way the transition to product designer, and now my niche is design systems. So last 6-8
Yeah.
years is this one, like working on the design system from Vela company, and now the big project from Malware.
Love it. Yeah, happy to have
Nice.
all of you on this session. My name is Farid. I'm going to host this session today. Great. The goal is to focus on what will be the first 30, 60, and 90 days of becoming a design system person within the team. Michael, would you like to start and share your perspective? Like, what will be your plan if you will start in a design system team?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it needs to be clarified first of all is, what you're walking into. Is this going to be an existing product or is it a brand new product? Because I think the approach slightly different, although it will the same kind of questions. Obviously, the approach will be very different and the time frame, I think. But let's say, for example, it's brand new. Let's say it's a new product, new team. You've joined as founder, designer, or part of a team. And one of your remits is to set that design system up, or at least set the kind of initial strategy. I think the first questions and the first things I would want to know is, right, what is the scope of this? So I think before you even think about Figma or whatever kind of software you're going to use, even if that's AI, that's probably a whole new conversation altogether. But I think before any of those is, what are we walking into? What are we doing? What are we expecting from this? Because that will give you an idea of the size of at least the MVP version of the design system that you need to implement. Time is key, so I think the faster we can get it done, obviously the better, especially in the landscape, the climate that we're in right now. I would always kind of sit down initially with PMs, devs, anybody else who's involved in that side of it and go, right, what are we expecting from this? What do we envisage the interactions to be like? Is it a basic brochure site? Is it a platform? Is it somewhere where there's account creation, all of that kind of stuff? Because that'll determine as well the kind of size of the component library that you're going to need. So that would be the very first thing. I would also get an idea on their expectation of time, because their idea of a time frame may be very different in terms of feasibility than what is realistic, because it'll give you a chance on the design team to actually turn around and say, actually, do you know what, could we extend that a little bit, maybe a week, 2 weeks? But it is possible, and I'll just say this off the bat, it is possible to kind of set up a minimum viable system within the first 30 days. I probably wouldn't always recommend it, but it is possible if you go through it right and you do the planning and the scope properly. As part of that scope, I would do a really rough version of a sitemap. Doesn't have to be the final, but at least document those initial interactions. So if it is a basic brochure site, is there going to be any forms on there? If there is, that'll tell you, whether you need things like buttons. It'll tell you about. Obviously, they'll all need to be built in. That would be my starting point. I'll give the other guys a chance to add to that now as well.
After you decide on the scope, I think it's very important to take a look at the scalability. If you're building a design system, many times it has happened to me back in the day. We started building a product, and the product eventually wasn't, like, some decisions were made, and these decisions were irreversible, or there was no way back. And that is really killing for a project or for a company, right? Like, getting started on a project and then spending a lot of money and then finding out that you have to do a lot of rework. That's what you really want to, not, you don't want that to happen. So I always think that building those first moments when you're diving with, like, after the scope, you're diving with your design team into that design system, you're talking with them like, okay, how are we going to get started? We decided on the scope, we decided on what we need. I think you should get together and decide, how are we going to build this, right? Like, are we just going to use one big color library and use those colors directly? Or are we going to create like a primitive color library and then a semantic color library and connect those together? They're focused on the background, on the foreground, on the headings, on the typography, on the buttons, the button background, and everything, hover states, whatever. And if you are working on a design, it's very easy, especially with a product, a digital product, it's very easy to just think about the screen that you're going to build at that moment and just say, okay, yeah, this needs to be red, so I'm going to make it red, and this needs to be black, and this needs to be gray. But the next person comes in and makes different decisions than you were making at that moment. So those decisions need to be made together, I think. Like, or at least one person needs to make them and document them to make sure that the next person that comes in can continue with that same setup. And that's something I really think is very important. You really should take your time and focus on that. I had a lot of companies saying like, yeah, but we don't have the time. We need to go live. We only have 2 months and we need to get started and start creating something. Like, just create something and that can go live. That's usable. Don't forget that if you take that time that I just talked about before to sit together with your team and make these decisions on the semantic color variables and the spacing variables and all those things, like, how is that system going to work? If you take that time, you're going to save so much time later on going back to because you already have your Lego sets, you already have your components, you already have everything. It's all connected, and you can just go back to one, like just the color library, for example, and say, hey, the brand color has changed, just change the color, and it cascades throughout your design. So I think really how you set up and how you make everything scalable and reusable and consistent, I think those are the things you should really think about before start creating screens and components.
I think
Gotta say, just as part of that, as part of that scope, I would say some of them conversations need to be, once you've defined, what interactions are going to happen, it will tell you obviously kind of roughly what components you're going to need. You might not need to build a huge 200 component library. You may only need a third of that. I think that it can also help you decide, right, do we need to build this from scratch, or can we use the skeleton of, like, material or ShadCN, Radix, something like that? Can we use that? Also get your devs in at this point as well and say, right, which library would you guys prefer? Because there may be, depending on what code base they're going to use, like if it's a React library, obviously it's things like ShadCN, Tailwind, you've got GlueStack, things like that. It will help if they know the Tailwind library and the CSS, it might help with how we construct the tokens as well, because there's already base token. We can just kind of go in and tweak those. We might not need to rewrite the whole thing and redesign from scratch.
So especially when you think about interaction, like if those components have already been built in by ShadCN, you can use those interactions that are already in place, maybe tweak them, maybe change a little bit like the colors of the hover, but at least the interactions are already there and the developer doesn't need to focus on those.
That's right. You can also look at your token library. If time is really an essence and it's not a big complex system, you could also keep it very simple. Let's say if the brand only has a few key colors, do you need to add everything? Yes, you're going to need red. If it's not in the brand palette, you're going to need red for warnings and errors and things. But do you need 50 versions of blue and green? And you could actually keep it real simple as well if time is a factor. Do you need a full arsenal of different sizes? If you know it's only going to be a brochure site, you may only need like 3 headings. You may only need one body text, one button text, things like that. It'll help you map out at least those things. You can always add to them later, develop the library, make it bigger. The only time I think you would probably have to think otherwise is if you're in a large enterprise organization, which has got a very specific brand, and you may need to do a lot of it custom. They may want specific shapes, things happening with the buttons and other components.
Love it. And within there is a question. Can you give an example of an irreversible decision that became a problem down the line? But I guess you already answered this question, right? By like the token architecture might be if we
Yeah. An example would be on a project, you decide on, let's say you have a color library, you have a bunch of colors, and you have a background. If you get started with the colors and connect them from the library straight away to components and then get started, like this happened to me on a project. It was a long time ago. Like we didn't have a bunch of the features that we have right now in Figma. So it was like beginning times of Figma. And we started creating a color library. We thought we were doing really great. We started using this color library, the primary color library, basically as just our set of colors, and started making decisions. And then after a while, we made decisions like this is the background color and this is that and this is that. And then the product just became bigger and bigger. And because that product, I mean, it's not irreversible. Everything is reversible. You can go back to it, change it. But the amount of work just starts heaping up really, really fast because it's an exponential graph, basically, because your product grows bigger and the places where you have been using that color on your design has been evolving, and it's been used in 120 pages and places inside the application. And then someone said, hey, we need a new feature. These kind of things mess up the consistency, and with consistency, they mess up your quality of your application. So that's, I mean, nothing is irreversible, but going back to all those colors and changing them, and then maybe at that point you decide like, let's create a semantic color library and connect those to the semantic ones. Like this is the background. Now we decided that all the background colors are shade 550. I'm just saying something. You can do that, but you'll have to go to all those 120 places and change it there. So it's not irreversible, but it's quite a lot of work to go back to all of those and change it. Developers will tell you, I don't have the time for that. And then you're stuck, right? That's a little bit what I mean.
That happens
But
similar.
I think it's.
Sorry.
Go on, Nuno.
That
I'll let you go.
Yeah,
It
no.
happened similar to me because on a project, they decided because of the speed again, the speed one, not to go with component tokens. But in 1-2 weeks, they revert the decision because it doesn't make sense on the things, of course. And we, from the design side, were saying we will come back to the component token. So come on. So in 2 weeks, we revert all the things that we are doing. So yeah, it's kind of these decisions that we have to make in our planning better in the beginning.
I think back to the planning.
Yeah.
I think once you know what kind of components you're going to use, start mapping out your tokens at that point. So even before you've gone into Figma again, have a look, and I would start planning that out first. I think the last design system I made, I sat in Excel first and mapped out the whole token architecture for everything. And it was a big help because I shared it with the developers and said, look, here's how I'm thinking of approaching this. Does all of this look, what you would recognize, and sped up conversations and decisions.
And a bit of these decisions are also just made because of experience, right? I mean, we're like, you are a senior designer, lead designer, so you've worked on a bunch of projects, and when you come in, you already tell everyone like, wait, hold on, before we continue, we need at least 3 shades of background colors because we know
you've already made the mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. You've made those mistakes, so you bring in that information, and I think that I've heard a lot of people who want to start a company or want to start creating a product, and they decide like, okay, let's get started with someone who is junior because we don't have a lot of money right now, and we go ahead with this junior person, and later on someone comes in with a bit more experience. I think you really should get your investment ready and invest in the beginning in someone with a little bit more experience so he can make the right decisions for your foundation of your product. And then later on, when someone comes in who is a little bit less experienced, when he breaks everything, you can just revert and go back to like a week ago, safe. But when that person gets started and then you bring in a more senior designer, that senior designer will tell you like, I can dive into your design system and make changes to all these components that you already created with someone who didn't really know what he was doing. I can just as well get started from fresh because it will take the same amount of time as me diving into this design system and finding all the mistakes that have been made. So I just want everyone like to be warned before you get
Yeah.
started, like create that foundation and set that up because that will save you so much time.
And let me add one
I would
thing.
echo that first 2 weeks is all about the scope. Don't rush,
Yeah.
don't run before you can walk. Get that scope in, and you'll pay dividends later down the line. Because if you start rushing it, you will have to go back. Guaranteed retrofix, probably accessibility issues, all of this kind of stuff. So take the time, do that, find out what it is you need, map it all out the best you can. Sit with your devs as well. Make sure it looks feasible with them because they might spot something that they say, actually, that's not going to work.
That is
And
important.
so always map it out first.
Create the relationship between the dev team and the PMs, all these things before you all pick up on the things. This is a relationship that we have. And another thing is, on the first days, normally I try to see the maturity of the designs and the maturity of the dev team, because I know that according with their maturity, I can do something or do another things. So just to agilize their work, I can work with the knowledge that they have, because we know that not all the team are seniors, not all the team are juniors, but it's very important to know the maturity of the two teams, for example. I normally do that one because they are the personas that we have for our design system. So it's important to know them.
I would say just a quick to touch on, sorry, I know you're going to ask something for Reed, but I think it's important. There's probably people thinking, what if we're in like a hybrid team where there's AI usage? I would say the first 2 weeks, again, is the same. Get the planning in. And I would say before you even start to vibe code, a little bit like if, it's best practice to have a PRD before you vibe code anyway, because it will help you, not get stuck in error loops and all of that thing. Totally different conversation altogether, but a reference document for the AI tool of the design system that you're going to use, because guaranteed, if you've ever used Lovable, things like that, there's inconsistencies with how they map the components. Colors will be different, fonts will be different, sizes, all of that. So map it all out beforehand, the same as you would for, if you were going to build it in Figma. Map out your AI system the same way. And then you can tell the AI system always reference this. So then you won't have to sit there and go, right, that's got the wrong button or it's got the wrong field.
Yeah. Let's summarize the first part of our discussion, making a discovery for the first 2 weeks, right? As we discussed that, talking about what's the MVP version of it, right? Creating a PRD document for the design system or one pager where we could highlight, okay, like here's the scope, here's the team, here are the main milestones, and here are what success will look like, right? Maybe some metrics around the adoption, making sure that within like first quarter, you might now have only 3 customers. It's like 3 different product teams out of 100, right? But in the next quarter, you'll be focusing on how to bring additional 10. When you will have more adoption, this is the time when the value actually being unlocked. If you have a design system but nobody's using them, it's really hard to communicate the value. Great. So we also highlighted that having workshop sessions with all the team members, I feel like there are like 3 main groups: the team members of the design system, the sponsors who are from the leadership actually sponsoring, and the product teams, your actual customers, right? Those are like the 3 main areas of which kind of groups you would like to talk to within the first 2 weeks. And also like platforms that we would like to support, this could be also added into the one pager. Time expectations are organized into the milestones. Maybe you will say that first milestone will be related to doing the inventory or setting up the foundations, and then we will move into other things. You mentioned really good point, creating relationships. I highlighted that with the maturity of the design system. Speaking about the maturity, there is like an open source framework if you would like to use with the link here, like 5 levels of maturity might look like, where together with your team, you can self-assess yourself and say that, okay, like we are on the level 2, but we would like to be on the level 4. Every checkpoint here could become an initiative in your roadmap, how you would like to improve your maturity of the design system. I also added some materials here below if you would like to take a look into that, starting with the org chart and understanding who are your partners are, who are your customers are, and maybe who are your detractors are. Maybe they try design system, but they don't want to use design system anymore. Maybe there is like 7 other design systems within the organization that you need to friendly compete with within the organization. It happens within the larger ones. This is mostly coming from the design operations perspective, where it will help you to understand what is your adoption strategy will be, and we will come back that in a second. And here's the preview of how your initiatives repository could look like. You can use Gantt charts for that to visualize what are the milestones, what kind of initiatives to perform, and some other materials here. And also, there are some interesting thoughts on how design ops will do the same thing similarly to the design systems, because we are all a part of horizontal program that is focusing on enabling the quality and efficiency within the organization. So here are some interesting thoughts from Z. She's working at Cloudflare. You can find her on LinkedIn as well. This is like the way how she presented this first 30 days of observing intake, getting all the requests from other people, and maybe summarizing if you had done already some surveys, just going through that, going through the feedback, and then doing this discovery of problem, prioritizing the top problems, and then framing the solution, top solutions, and then just move on into making sure that things will be adopted. Let's move on to the next phase here is the deep dives. And we can rename this section, right, instead of like deep dives, but this is like when we prioritize specific directions and we would like to go into the core aspects of the design system. And from the discussion, I highlighted a couple of things: the tokens architecture, the foundational design system decisions, creating component family specific inventories, making sure that you know what kind of deviations or variations of your component there might be. Outside of 30 different search bars, you might think about, okay, like here are the 2 search bars that we would like to make as a golden standard, put it to the design system, and focus on making sure that other product teams can enable that. Michael, you also mentioned sitemap generation. I also highlighted be AI ready. We can talk about that. What interactions are going to happen and core flows to cover aligned to core business value propositions. I feel like this is one thing that is connected. We can combine it into one topic called flows. Great. Let's take a look into the questions that people had. I fully recognize the efficiency of the design system. What efforts are needed for a fragmented organization to apply them effectively? And that might be a good question because that might be a part of discovery where we will talk about the adoption strategy. So who would like to go first here?
I'll jump in very quickly. Yeah, I mean, it's key. And I think we tried to allude to it, is that in those early stages, bring everybody in. Product needs to be in there, development needs to be in there. And also, it's the messaging going up the chain as well. Because obviously, anybody who's in the executive, director, C-suite, they want to know what the value of doing this is, because a lot of people initially will see this as labor intensive. It's time, it's costing us. But I think if you can sell the value, look at a lot of big players like Spotify, I think it's documented they've saved mostly, I think it's between 30 and 50% from what I've read. Efficiency, time to design, that kind of stuff. They're saving a lot of time by spending that first little bit of planning, getting it down. What is it we need? Let's document it. Let's map our tokens, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
By doing that, setting it all up and then doing it properly, there's a lot less kind of fixing and tweaking. One other thing is when the developers do come to develop and code everything, it looks a lot more like what your Figma screens or your designs that you passed over look like. Because I'm sure we've all had it where the final code looks very different. And there's usually a lot of designers and developers will blame each other, but I think it's, everybody's to blame. We all own it. I think we need to all come together a lot more. So I think it's key that, yes, make sure any discussions, any decisions, whilst we might own the design system or we co-own it with developers, I think we have to make those decisions as a group, because that way everybody knows why we're making these decisions, what are these decisions, when are they going to happen, so on and so forth.
If I could make it a little bit more concrete, like if we get an example for, like, you have a company and you start thinking about those first things that you were talking about, Michael. You could have a light and dark mode in a product. Who is going to use this design system? Is it going to be just designers and developers? Or is it also going to be marketing, creating social images, or getting the brand out of it? Maybe it needs to look differently. How many branches does this company have? Do the branches have their own branding? If branches have their own branding, I'd rather not create a separate design system, but I rather create one design system that can just be fluid and switch between styles. Like, okay, right now I'm creating for this brand, so I'm gonna go to my styles and change it to a different mode, for example, within Figma.
A different token.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing is the file structure. If you're building your design system, in the beginning when I started, I just threw everything into one file. When a company is fragmented, your design system needs to be fragmented as well. I usually create a foundational file. So in there, you will find the file that you will always need whenever you're designing. If it's for a product, if it's for marketing, if it's for whatever, you're always going to connect the foundational file, because in the foundational file, you will find the colors, the typography, and stuff like that.
The
And I will
guidance.
create, and then I create a secondary file, and the secondary file is more specific. So it's like, okay, it's the library for the web product that we are building, or it's a library for the mobile product that we are building. In the web product, you will have the grids for your websites and stuff like that. For the mobile version, you will have grids for mobile. You will have your typography that will be smaller and stuff. And then when you're starting to work on a project and you want to build something, you decide in the beginning, okay, I will connect the foundations and I will connect the secondary file that's applicable to my situation currently. So setting up your file structure is also very important.
I think as an example, if anyone's interested, Apple's just released all of their libraries on Figma, and it's a very good example of what Wadim's saying.
It removes the noise.
I can give you one more example. When I was in Carlsberg, the initial approach was to increase the version of the design system because the first version was not scalable. So they want to create a universal design system because they have 160 brands. They want to try to use the same design system to all the things. And all the decisions come to that. Okay, this is the scope. Let's bring the design system to all the brands. How can we do it? All the features can be measured. If a button is with round corners for that brand, okay, it's another change. It's modes, wherever you want to do it. And you do it like this one. In the end, it comes to this one. Within the file structure, and for this specific project, we do a different approach. Map each component on each file because of the file version control that we want to do it. So it's a more tricky one because it's a lot of libraries to manage, but in the end it works well because we can assign the libraries to the teams on Figma. So it works very well.
Hold on. Like one component in one file and then add that file. We'd love to see this.
Because we are very frequent control version. With that way, we can control on Figma. The version of the button is 2.0.1. The version of the carousel
probably makes your files lighter as well. Because
yes,
I know when you've got big design system, it can be a very heavy file.
And you can put that libraries on for marketing, for example, that libraries for design that specific product for that product. So it was but it works for that specific environment. So for management, it's a little bit work for us, but it works.
Were there any issues with it? Did you encounter any issues?
For me, no, because we think that from the beginning, so the workflow is there. We know that on the beginning, oh, it's to change this, is to create another one. So it's work. And
so you had the process mapped out. Yeah. I think that's key as well, is governance. How do we add?
And that experience was very interesting because on malware, I find some problems with this kind of management. Maybe on the, 30 days, 60 days, I create a plugin just to do the structure with AI, of course, with cursor, just to deliver to all the team, for example, the same structure of the file or this kind, because I was using to me. So I bring to the team this, like the design ops that we are talking some there. So it's working for us, it's working for the team. It's try to see the situation from the beginning, what is the best environment on the 30 days for that team, for that company, because from my perspective, it changed on the company. It's not the same people on that company and another company. So relationships and the person's first year.
Adapt to the environment, to the ecosystem. If that's going to improve the way it works, do that then. Adapt to whatever makes that workflow, that environment, that relationship better. I think that's the best way. Don't be too rigid. Be open to, the engineers are the ones who are going to actually take what we do and build the things. We want to make their job as easy, as fluent, and that handover as fluent as possible.
I like how your thinking is very like with the team together, we are building one product and less we are two teams, development and design, working on one product. So I really like that way of thinking.
And they are the last line of defense if you see it, because if a designer do something crazy, they say, "Oh, this don't exist. This is a snowflake for me. Do you want me to have more work? Come on." So
Yeah,
they are
exactly.
that
Yeah, I
We
last
think
never
line
do
of
it's
something
defense.
crazy.
as Wadim said. I think it has to be that team ethic. Otherwise, there will always be that divide. It will always be, as we see Rife on LinkedIn and all these memes. And I've never liked them. I've always hated them, and I've actually always blamed designers as well. I think there's a lot that we kind of take for granted. A little bit like the English speaking world. We expect everybody to speak English. I think we expect everybody to speak design. No, it's
Yeah.
actually us. We could change the way we operate, change the way we discuss, change the language, the framing, and I think even the way we work. So I've always tried to, kind of do what's best, what works best, and I've found it improves relationships,
Yeah.
and by improving them relationships, the whole workflow itself is vastly improved. So if the engineers have got a way they really like to do it, let's go
That's
for
right.
it.
Great. So I feel like we finalized the first part, right? The discovery part, and we added so many interesting highlights. There are so many interesting thoughts here. Let's move into the deep dives, right? Let's try to think about every aspect of those deep dives and try to bring some more insights. For example, the first question, right? And if we already started talking about connecting design and code together, right? The core idea here is to agree on how we group, how we name, and what kind of variations we have. Do you have any good practices on how to bring those two worlds together? Do you do like FigJam files, or like do you do that in Excel where we agree on the way how we name things, how we group things, and what kind of props we need to support as a part of the code, and what kind of like variations we will have in the Figma so that people will able to change the props, so that making sure that the props are the same in code and design. Because during that, if you have design connect, code connect from Figma, if you have a dev mode seats, you will able to actually translate those props from Figma directly into the code, so it will be easier for people to do the handoff. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you have any interesting practices here, how to connect those two worlds together?
That
Yeah,
would
the
be
first thing is know what the code is you're using, because that will help in terms of the code base will help you structure your tokens, especially if you're using a React like Tailwind. If you're building one from scratch, why spend hours creating a whole new token architecture when you could just use default Tailwinds and adjust the values at the end? That will speed things up. But again, I think it goes down to adapting to what works best for the team. You might not need the vast layers. Yes, I would always say never hard value in your tokens, only in your actual core that feed all of your other tokens. Because that way, if you do need to change one of the colors, you're not having to change every value in 200 components or 200 instances. You're just changing that one, which will feed all of the components or semantics. Try and keep it as simple as possible, and agree on a format. Agree the tooling as well, because you might go into an enterprise that has storybook set up and Figma, and you might want to update it in several different places. I've been in places where the designers owned the JSON file with all the tokens in, which was very nice actually, because it meant we could guarantee that the token directly matched what we had in Figma. That does require a lot of trust between the two teams, because developers won't always let you handle any GitHub elements. I would say agree on that, agree on the tooling, use whatever works best. If you need to use Miro, FigJam, things like that, as long as we all know where the one source of truth is, as long as we've agreed it, keep to that and don't start siloing it in different programs.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the same thing. But normally I make a workshop with the team just to sync some things. But my last approach after that is now I'm testing that I'm creating the components, bringing to AI, creating the first component and inject on Storybook directly. So they have the first drafts of the components and they start from there. They are not starting from scratch, and they have all the things. The thing is, but the machine don't give me the things that I want. The dev side, no problem, give me the rules. And we are creating this system to deliver from the beginning, again, the base of the components. So this is a new approach, but with AI, it's speed up the process and it's working. So you can try it.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what's your process there? So let's imagine that you are creating search bars, right? The first step
Yeah.
will be to understand, okay, like what kind of variations, what kind of props there might be, and
All of that
you
one.
are Like you mentioned, like using Storybook. Yeah,
So
please.
we see the needs of the component, depending on what is the properties that we have, create the component on Figma, all the variants, all the things, talking with the dev side, of course, and then we connect. In this case, we connect with Cursor C, the MCPC, all the things that we have on that specific component, and then we start to connect again locally with Storybook. And with what we are doing is, okay, let's build according what we have, and we can give the library for the Figma one, the tokens one, and let's create the first version from this one. And then on AI, when Storybook, you can prompting and other things, documentation. We can start to put some first draft of documentation. But this is not the final one, of course. For the dev team, it's the first draft that they have of the code. They have to see it. We have to align, creating some rules on the AI just to deliver the best code that they need. And from our side, from the design, we start to having some level of documentation. And the thing is, naming will be the same because the AI is creating the properties, is getting the name from Figma, is transporting for code. So this will be aligned from the design to the dev. But again, depending on the maturity of the team, of course, to do these kind of things.
Love it. I really like the way that you are starting with the storybook first, creating a documentation. This like the similar approach like Amazon they have in Amazon. Instead of working on the feature, they start with the release notes first, envisioning what the end state will look like, and
Of
then
course,
go back from it, making sure that the release notes or the storybook documentation is looking exciting and it's valuable. And then you are trying to reverse engineer and trying to support all this vision that you had before, right?
yeah, kind of.
Almost like the release notes become the acceptance criteria.
Mm-hmm. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so just conscious of time, I think, we're still, I know we're in the deep dives, but we're still within that 30 days. How do we want to move together? This is a discussion that could take days, days and weeks.
Let's move on. Let's quickly go through all the things, right? So for the deep dives, right, we spoke about this connecting design and code. And I feel like this is very important. Also, I've added the screenshot of the process map for like level 4 and level 5 design system maturity model, where we will always start with inventory, intake, research, analyze, and prioritize, and only then we start designing and coding stuff, connecting everything together and releasing it and focusing on the adoption and distribution. Michael, you also mentioned sitemap generation and also like starting with component inventory. So do we want to dive deeper into that? Like how would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you've got to know what it is you're building first. You need an idea. Is it like a brochure website? It's going to be very different to like a SaaS platform. On a brochure website, there's probably no need to create accounts. There's probably no need to, upload or do things like that. So you'll have a very different component set than a SaaS platform where you may be inputting bank details and linking. There may be a lot of API links as well, which will dictate how you're presenting information. I think a lot of it is just getting an idea on what it is we're building. What do we expect our users to do with what we're building? What does that interaction look like? A lot of that will determine, what kind of the base components are. Yes, we'll definitely need H1, H2, H3, for example. We'll definitely need body text. There probably will be some CTAs, so we'll need at least one or two. We'll need a disabled for sure, a non-disabled, the standard. You might need a secondary as well for non-primary actions, that kind of thing. If you map all of that out with where your interactions go or what the style of the interaction is it a form that you want somebody to fill out? Are they clicking a button to take you there? It tells you exactly. Then you start mapping out, right, yes, I'm going to need buttons, I need forms, so then I need the validation as well. What does the messaging look like for that? So before you've even done any building, once you're planning, you've also got to start looking at, right, does a voice and tone guide, for the way we supposed to kind of word these things, because you want your product to be linked with your brand, to have the same voice, same message, the same style. You don't want it to sound like somebody different, to your core brand voice. So that'll tell you little things like that.
So speaking about the validation, let's imagine that we've finished the discovery, we made the core decisions, and we're ready. Let's focus on
Yeah.
the validation. Like, how would you start validating and getting the first feedback?
I always think with getting validation is, I always say, get visual and get your images and bring them to the actual user. I'm currently working on a project where we are working on a sail yacht. The end user is going to be captains and first mates on board. We brought our I joined it. Okay, so imagine this. I joined a team where everyone is a technical developer, but also data engineers, stuff like that. They didn't have someone visual on board. I started creating the first screens that were basically just concept. Like they weren't even MVPs, they were before that. And I created those so just to validate, just to see like, okay, which direction do you guys want to go? Because you can talk with people and get some information, but I think you should dive into images and get something visual out of it and bring that to them. Because as soon as you bring just an image, even if it's crappy, it doesn't really matter. If you bring just an image of an application where they are going to work with, their mind starts running and they start telling you stuff. It just comes out automatically because they are very passionate about their own work most of the time, or if they are different types of users, they could also be very passionate about your product, right? At least you find someone who's very passionate, a very passionate end user. And as soon as you start showing images, they're like, this is what you mean. And then they start telling you stuff and you start writing. And that's just, I think validation, there's a amount of ways to do it. But I think to me, just one of the most best working ways is just get an image, bring it to them and talk with them. And sit there, it can be an image online. I personally like sitting next to them in these kind of situations better because it's just, I don't know, a little bit.
The excitement when they see it.
Yeah, I really like as soon as you start showing it, you will get very valuable information that you can use.
I think it's clear we make a distinction as well. We have that visual validation with what the user will see, but I also think we should look at validation in terms of internal, in terms of business validation as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, what does the validation between us, designers, product, and development look like? And also go one layer beyond and look up the vertical. You know, executives are going to want to make sure that we can actually validate what it is we're doing, you know, and why we've spent, you know, let's say 2 weeks in workshops and things like that, because all they will see is, right, my teams have not been at their desk or they've not been kind of in the trenches working on. So I think if we can see that, you know, and we can produce that, I think also at this point, get a baseline, especially if you've got an existing product, get a baseline of where you are right now. So time to design, how long it takes to do like a screen, a feature, a section. Same with the development as well, because then at least if you can get your baseline figures, once we do start implementing it and we pass the refinement, we can keep track of that then. And over time, we can say, you know what, look, we've cut down design time by 25%, 30%, 40%, you know, whatever that figure is. So I would say start thinking about that as well during this validation. And how do we, because what you don't want to do is leave the doors open, because you'll get 300 requests going, right, I want this button, I want this field, I want this color header, and so on. You need to document what the process looks like to add components, to amend components, or to remove components as well, and who owns that. Again, I would probably say do it as a collaborative with development team and product, so that nobody's surprised when a request comes in.
No,
It's most the same thing about this, but I was thinking one thing that is we are using Supernova to do all the documentation, and Supernova launched an AI feature that helps a lot with on the designs thing, because all the things they ask will be there, will be a source of truth. It's amazing. It's amazing to do all the things.
Love to hear more on that.
Yeah.
Nuno, we might have to do a follow-up session to this.
Yeah, maybe just the three of us, we could talk about
Let's go.
AI. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd love to see that.
great. So we spoke about the discovery, deep dives, and validation, and the next one is the adoption. Adoption is a huge thing. The change management is the huge thing, and maybe in the first 90 days you will not have too many adoption stuff because you are setting up advocate platform within your organization, making sure that you have partners across all the departments and all the product teams. Maybe that's a good topic for the next session as well. Great. So any final thoughts? Like, what are the top highlights, top 1 or 2 highlights? We can start with
Okay, putting me on the spot there. I really like Michael's approach where you're building a product not on your own. You're building a product with a team. You're doing it together, and your work starts getting fun as soon as you get together and say like, okay, it's the whole team who's responsible. If one thing goes to shit, we all go to shit. That's something I really like. I also think another highlight is to really look at your foundations. Make sure the foundation is set up right. Get someone in there who's senior, who has experience, who knows what he's doing to set up your foundation of your product before you continue, because you cannot get started with someone who doesn't really know what he's doing, because you will get a lot of debt and you will need to get back to it probably in the future, most of the time, unless you have like a wonder kid who doesn't have a lot of experience, who creates the right thing straight away. But yeah, that's for me, that those two are very important.
Love it. Michael?
Yeah, give them a pay rise, keep them on the books.
Yeah, for
No,
sure.
I think just hearing the perspectives is a highlight for me, because obviously,
Yeah.
I've led teams and kind of done it the way I've done it, but just to know that that kind of approach is shared, but also hearing as well about Nuno's, because there's one thing I've not done yet is include AI in. Obviously, I've done my
Yeah.
own examples, my own tests, but yeah, to actually hear it like in a live production environment is good. I'd like to hear more. So, but no,
Or
I think,
like
yeah,
see an example or something.
I think that kind of commonality of let's get the planning done first. Let's not rush in it. Let's not run before we can walk. Let's sit in a room, work out what it is we're building, because you want to try and get it, as near right as you can from that first go.
Yeah. Exactly.
For me, for all the beginning is connecting with the people, with all the team, with the people, because with this we can start to planning all the things. And another thing that we don't talk, we have to be awareness that in the company and that person's PMs and so on knows what is a really design system, and it is a product on the company. It's not a library. You lose it there. It's a product of the company. And sometimes we go there and ask to do something, and they don't realize, oh, this is our product. So it's important to have that from the beginning, from the first day, that information. Try to know if the company see as a product, connecting with the people. You give all that information, and then start to planning, start to discover, start to do whatever you need to on the first days.
Sometimes it's also something, they think like, oh yeah, it's a design system, so it's something designers need, but it's really something where you can include everyone of the company, and then it's a very valuable asset.
Sometimes the process change in all the company, and I see this happen. So
that's it. In those early discussions, you can educate on that. If you have got a team of anybody who's not 100% sure on what it is or what the benefits are, that's where you can, in those very early sessions, get them in workshops, show them like real figures of stuff that you've done, show them big players, and their experiences and their case studies. And it'll be because everybody wants to aspire, especially if you've got FANG references, they'll go down real well. But yeah, totally agree.
Love it. This is great. So thank you very much for joining. If you would like to join the community, feel free to join our Slack channel. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them there. I have some really good ideas for the next session: adoption, storybook, and then AI. Maybe AI should be the first, because I have some interesting thoughts there as well. It will be every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So if you would like to join, please join the community. You will get a notification when the new sessions will be there. Thank you very much for joining the session. It was a pleasure seeing you all and chatting with you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Fareed.